This story really starts with my mom's 1984 Volvo station wagon. My brother and I were supposed to drive this in high school, but my sister ran it out of oil. So, not to be ungrateful, but by the time my brother and I were ready to drive, the Volvo was out of commission, and my parents were going to rebuild the engine and work on it, but we needed a car in the meantime. And so my brother and I were begging to go look at some Mustangs. And my brother and I had just got our Eagle Scout awards, and my dad was quite proud of us for that. And he really wanted us to be able to get a Mustang. And my mom didn't really care for us to get the car as well, but my dad was like, "Well, let's go look around a little bit." So I had ridden my bike to the Ford dealership, and I saw an '89 Mustang like this one. It wasn't a 5.0, but it looked just like this, and it even had some kind of Cobra wheels on it. I believe they were more like the 95 Cobra R style wheels, but it looked just like this, but it was a four-cylinder automatic red interior car. And they were asking like $2,500 for it. And I begged my parents, please just let me get a Mustang. Compared to that Volvo, this would have been an awesome car. And one of the things I really liked about this the most was it was at '89, so it had the 25th anniversary badge on the dash. And I just loved the running pony with the tri-bar. Anything that I could get that had that Mustang pony on it would have made me happy. Now, I really liked Mustangs no matter what year they were. The Fox Body wasn't my favorite Mustang, but the other ones were so expensive that I was just hoping to get anything. There was an old couple in my neighborhood who had a '94, '95 Mustang V6 convertible. It was exactly like this one, same wheels, no rear spoiler. It looked just like this car. And I remember seeing it in their garage. The garage door would be open when we drive by, and I'd look in and see it, and I thought, wow, that's so cool. I really love the SN95 Mustang. And that was right when these were new. And so by the time I was ready to get my license, it was about 2001. I even had a yellow model 118 scale 94 Mustang GT. It was just like this one. I really liked it, and I had a collection of Mustang models, and I really loved this car. And I would have loved to have an SN95 Mustang or a GT. And it just turns out that down the street there was a 16-year-old girl whose parents went out and bought her a brand new 94 Mustang GT right when they came out. It was like the promotional car. It's like the car that you see in all the ads for the 94 Mustang when it came out. It just had those same three-spoke wheels that are 17-inch, but they look really big, and it was yellow. And I was so jealous that she got to drive that car around and that her parents had bought it new for her. And there was another girl at my high school who had a '96 Mustang GT. It was Rio red, 5-speed, black interior. I loved that car. I would sit on the school bus and watch her walk out to the car, swinging her keys on a lanyard, hanging out with her friends, and she would drive that GT, and I was so jealous. I was sitting on the school bus with no car. I paid a lot of attention to these cars, and I knew all the little details. A lot of the earlier GTs and her 96 had this blacked out valance on the bottom that was kind of like a plasti dip or rubber coating. I don't know why, because the V6 cars didn't have it, but the GTs did. Certain years had that, and so hers had that, and it also had the 5-spoke wheels just like in this picture. And there was another kid at school whose parents bought him a 1999 35th anniversary V6 laser red 5-speed Mustang. And I remember that car I loved because it was a new edge. I know it wasn't a GT, and I didn't really know much about the differences between the engines back then, but I saw that car and I really loved it. It was a beautiful color. I loved the body style. I liked it better than the SN95, and this car was always filthy. I remember going out and looking at it before the bus left to take me home. I'd go out in the parking lot, look at the car, or he would be at football practice, and I'd go look at the car while he was at football practice, and the car was sitting in the high school parking lot. And I remember specifically looking at the '99 35th anniversary badge on the fender. All the GTs, all the V6 cars came with those badges that year. And I remember looking at that running pony and the tri-bar and the ring around it that says 35th anniversary, and just really wishing that I could have that. I thought it was so beautiful, and I really liked that. I thought if I ever had a car like this, it would always be clean. I would never let it get this grimy and dirty, and I would appreciate it so much. I remember I was riding on the school bus and we were leaving the school parking lot in traffic, and the kid had let another kid drive this Mustang, and the other kid was from a very wealthy family. His parents owned several car dealerships here in town, and that kid was totally abusing this Mustang, and I watched him do like a reverse 180 or something with it with the e-brake, and he smoked up the tires and he was spinning it around and just being very abusive to the car. And I just thought, wow, I can't believe that they're doing this. And when you're in a position like I was, where you had no car at all, and you see other people abusing something really nice, you don't feel very good about it. It makes you feel pretty upset. Well, eventually, one time the guy had taken this car out to another high school, and he was dating a girl from another high school, and her boyfriend got mad, and he took a fork and totally forked the whole car, just keyed the whole thing. And they did catch the guy, and they made him pay $4,000 for a new paint job for the car. And instead, the guy bought new wheels and a TV, and at the time a PlayStation, so that he could play PlayStation where the radio used to be. He installed a TV there and had a PlayStation, so he could be in the parking lot hanging out with his friends and stuff. Unfortunately, not much later, the car got T-boned in an intersection and totaled, and that was the last I ever saw that car. So I remember I went and looked at that '89 Mustang at the Ford dealership. I rode my bike to look at it, and I remember coming home, and my parents were still in bed, and I went into the room and talked to them about it a little bit, and I was begging them for it. And my dad said, well, we can go ahead and look at it, I guess. Let's go look at it. So we went to the Ford dealership and we test drove it. And I remember the transmission clunked really bad. It had red interior, which I wasn't really a fan of either, but it was a pretty beat up car. But I was really hoping that my parents would let us buy it. And my dad got out of the car, and it was getting dark, and he said to my mom, I can just see the transmission to that car sitting on a table in a few months. If we bought that car, it's going to need an overhaul. It's going to need work done to it. And my dad was an A&P mechanic, and he ran a flight school. He was very knowledgeable, and he's overhauled engines and things. And he said, I don't want to be working on that car, and if we buy it, I know it's going to be a problem. And so my mom said, well, we tried. Let's go home. And my dad said, well, are there any other Mustangs around here? And my brother and I looked at each other, my twin brother, and we went running, because this part of town, there are car lots everywhere. It's just a whole row of dealerships, and we started running. We left my parents with the Suburban and the kids at the Ford dealer, and we just started running through the car lots, looking for a Mustang anywhere. And I remembered that there was a 96, 97 Mustang Gt Convertible at a place just down the road, but they wanted $15,000 for it, and I didn't think that my parents would go for that. But we were running and running, and we both stopped, and I told my brother, remember on our driver's ed test, there's that car lot over on Sunset Boulevard that had 3 Mustangs on it. So we jumped in the Suburban, and we all drove across town to this car lot, and it was getting dark. Like I said, it was kind of late. We didn't know if they were even still open. This is an actual picture of the building. It's not a car lot anymore. It's a little smoothie place, and they do a Cars and Coffee. So this is a picture from Cars and Coffee, which is what they were doing with it now. They've since moved the Cars and Coffee event to somewhere else, but this is the building, this is the place, and where those Mustangs are all lined up on a row there, there's a little bit of a hill. So as you can see, where these Mustangs are lined up, they're parked opposite of how the cars were parked when they were for sale there. They would be facing the road behind them. So imagine all those Mustangs just parked going the other way. And so when I was driving around in the driver's ed car with my brother, and we were getting our hours with the driving instructor, we passed in front of this car dealership, and they had 3 Mustangs there, and 2 of them were parked on the hill like these cars are, and one was underneath the little carport they had at the time. And those Mustangs were a 1998 chrome yellow V6 Mustang. It looked just like this one. It had the door stripes, which were on the V6 Mustangs back then, and it had the pony badge on the fenders because it was a V6. Now this car has black wheels in the picture, but the V6 actually had these 5-spoke starfish style wheels, and these wheels were a option for the GT and the V6 in the 90s. So this is what the car really looked like, even though this would be a 94-95 GT in this picture. So imagine this car but with the stripes like in the previous picture. And that was the first one I saw, and to be truthful, I really liked yellow, and I really wanted the yellow Mustang. I thought it was really fun and really bright, and that's probably why I have my yellow Mach 1 that I love to daily drive today. And my brother has his Screaming Yellow Terminator right now as well, which we both liked yellow a lot. But back then the salesman told my parents that the yellow one was a V8, and my mom didn't really like the yellow. She said that's too bright for you guys to be driving that all around or whatever. And the salesman said that it was a V8. Well, knowing what I know today, I know that that was not a V8. It was a V6. It had the pony badges on the fenders. It had the stripes on the doors. It had single exhaust on one side. It was definitely a V6. The next Mustang that was underneath the carport was this beautiful laser red 2000 Mustang GT. It was a 5-speed. It had parchment interior, so I'd rather have black or gray, but it was a parchment interior car, leather seats, beautiful car. It looked so nice, and they wanted $20,000 for it back then. And if you know anything about the history and me and all these cars, you'll know that Bullitt 974 was very special to me at this time. I really wanted a Bullitt, and of course that was out of my control. There's no way I could have had one. And this was before the Mach 1s and the Terminators were out. This was 2001, so the Bullitt was brand new, and there was a guy in my neighborhood who was really nice to me, and he took me around and gave me rides in this supercharged Bullitt that he had. And you know, he owned the Ford dealership. He had a lot of money. He had Ferraris and Eleanor from Gone in 60 Seconds. He had a lot of really neat cars, but I really loved the Bullitt. And so to me, I really wanted a New Edge Mustang. That was my favorite, especially a GT or even a Cobra, but I knew that that wasn't going to happen. So this laser red GT to me was a dream car. I thought it was such a nice looking car, and I really wanted this one. But it was $20,000. And let's remember that we were just looking at a 4-cylinder $2,500 Fox body that I was hoping to get. So I wasn't trying to push my luck and try to talk my parents into getting this car. But you know, I've thought a lot of things about this car over the years. I thought about if I'd have gotten this Mustang, then I don't know if I'd have the Mach 1s and the Cobras and everything else. I think I would have built this thing up and I would have kept it forever. And you know, I've also thought maybe I would have gotten myself hurt or killed in this car because it was a GT and it had a lot of power, and maybe it's better that I started out in a V6. I also remember years later seeing this car listed for sale in the newspaper article, and back then when I was looking at this car, it had 5,000 miles on it. It was like brand new. And I remember seeing it and it had like 20,000 miles or 30,000, still pretty low, and they were asking 15,000 for it over the years. And I don't know whatever happened to this car. I kind of wish I could find out, but it's just one of those things where the car was sold and I never saw it again. And so now this takes us to Mustang number 3 on the car lot, which was this 1997 laser red Mustang V6, 5-speed, black and gray interior. Very nice car. It had 39,000 miles on it. And this one I really wanted as well. And under the lights, my mom thought it was kind of a maroon darker color. She didn't know it was such a bright laser red color. And so she was more willing to get this car. And I liked the yellow one, I liked the laser red GT, and you know, I would have been happy with either of those. But my mom was okay with this one, so we were definitely happy that she was considering it. And we took it for a test drive, and my dad was driving it with my brother and me. And we were just so excited to be driving this car with my dad, and I think he really wanted to get this for us. And I remember we went down a side street, and he said, "Well, I'll let you get this car if you promise never to do this in it." And he took off, he spun the tires, and then he got on the brakes, and he spun it sideways and went down another side road, and he had some fun with it. So that's the only time I've ever seen my dad do anything like that in a sports car. Of course, he had airplanes and things, and he was very good at flying and driving and all those things, but I never really saw him do anything like that, and never saw him do it again. But it was really funny. And so we got back to the dealership, and we started talking to the salesman, and my parents were saying, "Well, I'm sure you're closed tonight, maybe we'll have to come back for it." And the guy said, "Well, I have 2 more people who said they're going to come tomorrow and buy the car." And my parents had what was called a side draft from the USAA company. My dad was a military veteran from Vietnam. He was in the Air Force, and he had this side draft which said that they were pre-approved up to $50,000 for any car they wanted to buy, and that USAA could let that be basically a down payment on the spot kind of a thing. So they gave that to the dealership, and they let us take the car home. And one of the most important things about that night was when we were looking at the car and my parents were talking with the salesman and they were inside, my brother and I were looking the car over just in disbelief that we were going to get to have this beautiful Mustang. And my twin brother was so interested in the time in BMWs that he was pushing to get a 3 Series BMW. And what I'm saying here is the most important thing of the night was this is the night where my brother really committed to being a Mustang guy. And I always wanted a Mustang or a Camaro. I wanted an American car. And he was into the BMWs, which was cool for him. And I know there was some cars he was considering at this time. But I remember how excited and happy he looked, and he was sitting in the car, and he was already taking ownership of this car. This was becoming his car in that moment. And maybe it's because he's the older of the twin brothers, you know, he was always the more dominant one. He was always, you know, telling me he was stronger and smarter and all these things, and he kind of took ownership of this car immediately. But I looked at him and I thought, okay, you know, he really likes this car, and I think it's cool that he likes Mustangs so much now, and I thought, I'll just let him have this one. This can be his, and I'll get one later. So even though we shared it, I kind of looked at it more like it was his car, and I'll look for another one, and maybe if we're lucky, I'll get to get my own at some point. And we didn't know if or when that would ever happen. Something else about that night that my brother and I both noticed, and I heard both of us relate this and tell people this, was the car's interior was so nice for what it was. Yeah, base model, cloth seats, which actually held up really well. They were very firm, very nice seats. But something that stood out to us was at night, the gauges lit up so nicely, and the radio buttons lit up so nicely. Everything was crisp and clear on this car compared to that 80s Volvo, where it seemed like there was one light bulb behind the dash that kind of lit up all the gauges together very dimly and not clearly to read every letter. It was just kind of this broad, dim light. But in this car, it had such nice gauges and everything. It was a 97, but it was still 13 years newer than that Volvo, and it was just so much nicer of a car. Everything drove so tight and smooth, and it was a low-mile car. This car was so fun and so nice. It was more than what we ever thought we were going to get at that time. And you can see in these pictures, if you know what you're looking for, the radio, it was a non-Mach 460 car. And you can also notice that it has a shift knob from a 99 to 04 V6, and that was something we added to it. And that, I believe, came off of the 99 Laser Red V6 that the football player at high school had. I think he changed his shift knob out, and he had that one just laying around, and for whatever reason, My brother had gotten it from him somehow, and something else that he had gotten from that kid, if you recall in the story, he had a PlayStation put in his V6 and a TV, and so he didn't have the radio or the CD player anymore, and he gave us the CD player because this car did not have the CD player as an option. It had the slot for it down below with a little tray, but it did not have the CD player. So he had given us the OEM CD player out of his car, and we tried hooking it up, but there was something wrong with the wiring, but we took it to an audio shop and they got it all put together for us. And so now we had a functioning CD player, which back then was a pretty cool thing. So very nice low mile car. We liked that it had the clock on the dash. If you know about these Mustangs, 94 to 97 had the clock on the dash up there. And in 98 they changed the dash and they integrated the clock into one of the radio station buttons. So this car would have like 6 buttons on the radio for pre-saved radio stations, but the 98's slot number 6 set clock on it. So that was those little differences that we noticed over the years, and I thought the clock was cool. But then obviously as you watch videos and you see pictures, you notice that the Mustangs that don't have the dash clock seem to be like they were newer, nicer, because obviously they were different and it was a newer thing. One of the interesting things that happened right when the car was new, we drove it over to the Home Depot with my parents at night, and this is actually a picture of the Suburban, but that's not our Mustang in the picture, and that makes sense because there's no reason why we would have the Mustang and the Suburban in a picture like that on this night, because it was the first night we had the car. Pretty interesting though that I don't know why this picture was taken. I guess we probably took a picture of another Mustang with our Suburban there. But anyway, what's interesting about this was it was the first night we had the car. We drove it to Home Depot with our family, and I remember that I was sitting in the Suburban, and actually the Mustang would have been parked next to the Suburban by the driver door there. But this is the same parking lot, and it's at night. It's like exactly like that night. And I was sitting in the Suburban with my younger siblings while my parents went into the Home Depot. We were remodeling our house at this time, and while we were sitting there waiting, my brother was in the Mustang alone, and 2 guys pulled up behind him in a little truck, and they got out and they each walked up to the driver and passenger side door of the Mustang and stood right next to the car, and they made hand gestures over the roof, pointing down at the car, you know, pointing at my brother, and my brother was just sitting in the Mustang wondering what they were doing, and they turned and looked and saw me sitting in the Suburban looking at them, and at that point I think that scared them off to see that there was somebody else watching them, and they both got in their truck and drove away. So it was really weird. I don't know if they were going to try to rob him or take the car. And back then, that car was pretty new. It was only 4 years old, and it looked brand new and nice, and it looked like a V8 to anybody who didn't know the difference. You know, it looked like a really nice car. So I don't know what that was all about, but that was really weird, and that happened the first night we had the car. So this was a very special time for my brother and me. This was right when we were getting our driver's license. It was a time where we didn't have any money. We didn't think we could have a car this nice. I remember watching all of the Car and Driver TV series when new cars were coming out and being tested. I believe it was Speed Zone was the channel that was on TV that had all the car shows and things, and it was just fun to be part of the culture now and starting to get into cars. And let's remember, there wasn't Facebook or Instagram or any of the social media platforms where you could really see a lot of these cars. There was 3.8litermustangs.com, and that was the forum that we loved to get on and see other Mustang owners and see what they were doing. And I remember watching a video of a V6 like this that was the Pacific Green, I believe, and he was doing a huge burnout. It was a peg leg burnout, only one wheel spin with a 7.5 open-end differential, but it was spinning and smoking like mad, and he did this really, really long burnout with the car, and I remember thinking how cool that was, and YouTube wasn't even around yet, so these videos were very few and far between, but it was cool to see people uploading videos of these cars. So in this picture you can probably tell that there's been one modification done so far, and that is the clear corners for the headlight system. You can see how they look. They actually match the factory lenses for the headlights, but they just have a clear reflector on there instead of the orange one. And funny enough, my parents had actually just replaced the stock light on this side because my dad was driving the car and he accidentally bumped into the bumper of a truck or something. It was just enough to whack the corner light and break it. He was trying to park and he was too wide, and he put the clutch in to put it into reverse, and the car just kept rolling and bumped that bumper. And so my parents went to the Ford dealership and they paid $90 for one replacement marker light. And then after that we decided to go ahead and get these clear corners on eBay. Now, as you can see in these pictures, it's the fall time. This was November. I love the fall, and this is probably why, because it was the time that I got my first Mustang, and it's a time where, you know, you wear a sweater because it's getting cold, the leaves are changing, the sun's changing. It is a different time of year, and that has now been associated with me with cars. And my brother and I both love buying Mustangs, and it seems like whenever the fall comes around, we tend to get into this desire to buy another Mustang. And I bought a lot of Mustangs in the fall, not planned that way, but I think that's just what happens, and that's probably why. So it was a great time of year, and it was just really fun to have a new car. You can see in this picture, this is the street where we grew up, and it's a cul-de-sac, so it's a big circle up there, and there's a few houses, and that's the only thing up there. And we really loved living here. It's against a mountainside, and so you can see that it's shady in the afternoons, and you can see our Suburban up there in the driveway. It was always shady, and it was nice for the cars because we could wax them and work on them and be out there in the shade without the sun beating down on us or fading the paint or whatever. And it was just a really wonderful place to grow up. So you'll see in a lot of these pictures how it's a nice shady place. It was somewhere that was pretty quiet. It was off the main drive, and we just had a really nice situation here. Now, my brother and I couldn't have jobs back then because my parents ran a flight school, and we had to be home to get the kids from school and drive them up to the airport while my parents were up working on airplanes and scheduling and running a whole flight program. And so that was another reason why we were able to have this car, is because my parents needed us to drive them around and run errands, and or drive the kids around and do things for them. So you can see it was a really nice neighborhood, really nice place to grow up, go out and take pictures of the cars, take videos of driving the cars around and listen to the exhaust and just get to know the cars. And so this is where a lot of it started for us. Now, our V6 Mustang had the 15-inch wheels. They were the 3-spoke ones, and they weren't our favorite wheel, but they were a nice wheel. They were machined with the argent paint on the inner sides of it, and we were very lucky to have this car, so we weren't complaining about the wheels, although we did want some 5-spoke wheels or GT wheels, Cobra wheels, something like that. And if you remember the story about the Granny GT, in our neighborhood there was a chrome yellow Mustang GT, and you can see it had the same wheels, but they were 5-spoke wheels, and they were 17-inch instead of 15-inch. So this was a beautiful looking car, and a very nice little lady owned the car, and I still see her riding around in it now. She was driving it around in her early 90s, and now I see her sons driving her around in it, so she's still out enjoying the car. But that car was in our neighborhood, and it was also a big part of all this whole time. I remember her car was for sale in town for $15,000. I went and looked at it when it was for sale. It had like 20,000 miles on it. It was very nice, very low mile car, and I really liked that car. Now, if you look at this picture of the Mustang, you'll notice another modification, something very small, but you'll see it has the nice dual exhaust on it now. If you recall from the first picture of the car, it had that dinky, angled down, single tip exhaust, and it really looked terrible. And back then, dual exhaust was a big thing. There weren't a lot of cars that had it. Nowadays, the EcoBoost Mustangs and the V6 Mustangs earlier and the S197s came with dual exhaust and everything, and they looked so much better. But back then, the 3.8 Mustangs had that one single tip, and we did buy a chrome tip, like slide-on from AutoZone, to make it look a little bit better, but it's still angled down, and it didn't look very good. And in this whole story, there's a point I want to have made. I have Terminator Cobras, I have Bullets, Mach 1s, I have a lot of cars, and I've had a lot. I've had 18 Mustangs. And the point I want to make in all this at the beginning is, from humble beginnings becomes greater appreciation. And so I came from having this V6 that I appreciated and I was very humble with, but it didn't even have dual exhaust. It didn't even look very good. It wasn't very fast. But I was so grateful for it, and I think that makes it so I really appreciate the cars I have today. Even while I'm making this video and I go out into the garage to drive my yellow Mach 1 to work, and I open the door and I look at the side scoops and all the things I love about the New Edge Mustang and the V8 and everything. And all those things I appreciate more because I came from the V6. So look at how much better that looks to have dual exhaust. It really looks so much better and it sounded really good. Now, where did we get this exhaust? You would think that we would have got the Flowmaster kit. I remember going in and seeing it in AutoZone, and it had a picture of a 98 Cobra, 96 to 98 Cobra, and I thought that was pretty cool. But this was actually purchased from Rouge off eBay. Rouge or Saleen, I can't remember which one it was, but they were selling all of these factory exhaust takeoffs from the GT Mustangs because they were adding their systems. And so this was a great chance for us to get a dual exhaust, and it looked really good, and it was brand new. You can see it doesn't have any corrosion or anything on it. They were brand new takeoffs, and I'm telling you what, these really sounded good. I know V6 cars don't sound good. I think one of the worst sounding engines is a V6 Tacoma with loud exhaust. It just sounds terrible. But for whatever reason, these sounded really good on the 3.8 Mustang. We even had a kid with a white 96 to 98 GT ask us if ours was a Cobra. He said, "That sounds really good. Is that a Cobra?" So yeah, we had the exhaust in our room for a little bit until we could get it welded on. My brother and I shared the basement, and you can see I like sleeping on a futon mattress. Like, I don't know, I was just real chill. But what I like about this picture is the period correctness. If you look at the wall, you can see I have pictures out of the brochures for the 2003 Mustang that I had put on my wall. You can see there's the brochure with a red GT, and then above it is the Mach 1000 audio system advertisement with the guy plugging his ears. And that one they changed. The earlier version of it had him plugging his ears and it said, "I'm sorry, officer, I can't hear you." And then they changed it to something else. And I think my brother has the older version saved somewhere. And I can't remember if 03 had that and then 04 they changed it to something more correct. But anyway, in the top left, it's hard to see, but there's a picture of me in the actual Eleanor from Gone in 60 Seconds that the guy in my neighborhood owned. And just a lot of really cool posters. I even had a 10th anniversary one. I can see there's the bullet jump picture there, and even a couple of the Mach 1 brochures. So obviously that was the brochure for 2003, and I had taken it and opened it up and used it as posters on my wall. So there you go. I had no idea back then I would own 4 Mach 1s, a blue one, a red one, 2 yellow ones, plus the 10th anniversary Cobra that was in the other picture you can't really see, and a competition orange Terminator. All the good cars, they were on my wall. Everybody talks about growing up and having posters on your wall of your dream car. Well, I guess that happened for me. So this was a very wonderful time, and I'm very happy to have had this time in my life. High school was really fun. The music that was out that gives you these memories. going to the high school football games and being able to drive these cars there. I remember we were actually at a football game with this car, and we parked next to a white GT that one of the football players' parents had owned, and my brother was looking in the window, see how many miles was on it, see if it was a stick shift, all that, and they came out and they asked him what he was doing, and they were really rude to him about it. So it's really funny to think back then that they were talking to my brother, who being rude to one of the greatest Mustang enthusiasts that will come over the years, and who will grow to have a very huge following and respect from the SN95 and New Edge Mustang community especially. So that's really funny to see that. It reminds me of the Ford versus Ferrari scene where they're looking at the new Mustang in the showroom at the display, and the boys looking at the car and touching it, and Leo Beebe is there disgusted that this kid's touching the car, and he's telling the kid, don't touch the car, and the kid looks back at him and he apologizes, and then he sees his dad, who at the time doesn't know that it's actually Ken Miles, the guy who's going to basically win Le Mans for them. And in that scene, it brings back a lot of memories to me. I went to the showroom and looked at the new Mach 1s when they came out, and I felt like they didn't want me there. They didn't want me touching the car. They didn't want me looking in it. I didn't have any money. They wanted me to stay away from it so they could have someone else who's going to buy the car look at it. And now you look back, and I've owned 4 of those Mach 1s, and I've had the Terminators and the Bullet and all that stuff. And so I think that's pretty interesting. Now, something else I wanted to mention was my very first Mustang keychain, which I talk about in the update video of my Bullet Mustang. I have always kept this keychain on my daily driver, and that keychain is important because before I ever had a Mustang, I saw it on one of those big stands they have on a countertop at a hardware store where they display all sorts of different keychains. And that keychain was amongst other ones. Some said 5.0 so with the older font like the Fox body had, because remember this was back in 2001. And I remember being in that store with probably my grandpa. We were doing a lot of work on the property that he had to build the house that he ended up having, and we'd go into this place all the time to get hardware supply or pipe or whatever it would be, and they had a section where they made keys for the house or for whatever, and they had one of these stands there with all the keychains for different cars, BMW, Mustang. They had all sorts of different ones, and this one was on there hanging. And I remember thinking, if I ever get a Mustang, I would love to come back and get that keychain and have that on my keys, so when I'm sitting in school at the high school, I know I got my keys in my pocket to a Mustang and I have a cool keychain on there. So for that reason, keychains have always been a little important to me, and this was the keychain that was hanging there. So as soon as we bought the Mustang, we did go over there, and this one was still there on the stand, and I took it off the stand and purchased it, and that was a keychain I've had my whole driving life since I was 16, and I still have it on my Bullet Mustang keyring right now. So as you can imagine, this was a very fun time going to high school and having a car like this at that age. And when you're that age and you don't have as many responsibilities, I think you have more time and more fun with your cars because you have time to go out and polish the wheels and shine up the tires and do a lot of things that you wouldn't usually have when you have a family and a job and all that stuff. And like I said, we didn't have a real job at that time because our parents needed us to be home for the kids and to run them up to the airport and do things with them. So we had a lot of time to take pictures of the car and shine it up and spend more time with this car than I would probably spend with other cars, just all at once. I mean, obviously I've had my other cars longer than I had this one, but it is a special time and you only get that first car time once. And I remember telling my dad, he liked the 60s GTOs, but he never had one, and I remember telling him, Dad, would you like to have a GTO right now? And he said, nah, not really. And I said, so would you say it's more important to have it when you're younger? And he said, yeah, it would have been. So I said, okay, well in that case, can I have a Mustang? Because you you know that I'll enjoy it the most right now. And so it's also kind of sad that out of all my favorite Mustangs, like my Terminator Cobras and my Bullet and everything, that I didn't have those at this time in my life when I could enjoy them more. But anyway, here's some high school parking lot pictures. I had a friend who had a Camaro. I had a friend who had a Celica GT, which I raced and beat with my P6, and my friend's Buick there next to us in the parking lot. And that's just kind of a show of what kind of cars were at the high school parking lot. And so you could see that this Mustang was a very nice car for the time. Now, something that we were going to do with this car that became one of our favorite memories was take it across a couple states to Nevada, where my grandma and grandpa lived, at a place called Donner Lake, which is near Lake Tahoe. This is the extraterrestrial highway. You can see this is called the Little Ailey Inn. It's a hamburger place in the middle of nowhere down the ET highway, or extraterrestrial highway as they call it. They have this stand from the movie Independence Day with a time capsule or a plaque and everything on there. And we got to go out in the middle of the desert with this car and take it across the Sierras and go to our grandma's place, where we had spent a lot of time as young kids on family vacations, but this time we got to take the Mustang along. Our parents let us take the Suburban and the Mustang and go on this road trip, and that was always fun because it built up some memories and some road trip feelings that would forever last in the desires of the heart of a muscle car fan or a Mustang fan. It was a real awesome experience. And so this is Donner Lake. It's one of the runoff lakes to Lake Tahoe, and it's just a nice vacation place where our family would always go. So it was really cool to be able to go there and bring the Mustang with us. And so you can see the train going through the mountain there by the lake. And so we kept the Mustang here, and those trees did leak sap onto them, and that was really too bad. So we went down and got a car cover at the local hardware store, and we washed the car and put the cover on it so that it wouldn't get that. So this is just my brother and me enjoying the lake, having fun. And the cool thing about that was we had this car to ourselves, so we could just get in the car and go drive around and cruise around Truckee, California, which is a little town there by Donner. And we could just go and cruise around town and come back. Just kind of come and go as we pleased. We had our fun toy there with us as we would spend the vacation there. And that part of California was really nice, and I remember seeing a lot of cool cars there over the years. I remember seeing Celine Mustangs and even a 10th anniversary red Terminator convertible that was there at one time when they were brand new. And we would pick up the local auto traders, and they were full of really cool cars. I remember seeing a red '03 Mach 1 for sale in the auto trader for like, I want to say 23,000 back then, because they were still pretty new. But I remember looking through those and buying model car kits down at the little hardware store and making those on the balcony of these vacation home condos that my grandparents owned. I remember buying an SVT Lightning and putting it together on the balcony there. So it was really cool, really fun time. Now this is where things are going to change dramatically. I was always on the lookout for another Mustang, and I came across this Oxford White 2002 V6 5-speed at the Ford dealership. It had pretty low miles. They were asking $12,000 for it, and I begged my parents for this. I remember begging my mom to buy this car, and I was in the laundry room with her while she was loading the laundry, and I was saying all the good reasons why I should have it, and it was just too expensive. I really liked the new Edge. I really liked white. I thought it looked good with the stripes on the side. I could just imagine having this car and how cool it would be to have it in high school. Now, I did forget to mention the first Mustang we bought, my parents purchased it for $10,000. So I don't think they were looking to spend that kind of money again on another Mustang, but if I could find one cheap enough that maybe they would go for it. The next one I really liked was a mineral gray V6 5-speed car at the Ford dealership. Again, too pricey, and they just weren't gonna go for it. And so I kept looking around, and I came across a green 1995 Mustang GT. It was a 5-speed, and it had the brown interior, but it was a little beat up and the paint was peeling pretty bad. I didn't like the brown interior. I didn't like green either, but it was a GT, and I would have been very happy to have it. I didn't like the wheels either. I mean, there was nothing about the car that I really loved, and I would have liked to have a different color. I mean, the wheels weren't my favorite. They were cool because of what they were, but I mean, this car could have looked good with bullet wheels or something on it, and that's kind of what I was thinking, but the paint was pretty bad, and my parents turned it down. And I think they were asking 5,500 for it or something like that, which was pretty good for a GT back then. But I want to say it also had some issues. I think it had 114,000 miles, which wasn't so high. But we kept looking, and I found this white 96 GT, and it was a 5-speed car, and I really liked it. Same wheels, everything as this car has. I remember driving by the dealership all the time and seeing it parked in the back, and I could see the wheels from where it was from the road. And these 17-inch wheels, which I have referred to in the past as the Granny GT wheels, because they're the ones that are on that 98 yellow GT, but these wheels look bigger than they really are. I think it's because they have that slight dish to them, and the spoke design, everything about them makes them look bigger than a 17-inch wheel. And I like them, and I think they look really good on these cars. But anyway, I saw this car sitting in the back of that car lot. I'd drive by and I'd see it, and I would really want it. I'd see it with the hood open, and I finally convinced my mom to go in there with me and bring her checkbook, and let's go buy that GT. Unfortunately, when we got there, we asked about the car. They said they wanted $7,000 for it, which wasn't too bad. The Granny GT was like $15,000 back then, and it wasn't too long after that that we were looking at this one. So it was like half the price as the other GTs. But when we opened the hood, we could smell coolant, and the whole hood blanket was stained with coolant, and it was all over the engine bay. And they said that the car had a blown head gasket, but they were going to look into fixing it. So that's a pretty big issue. And my parents did not want to get involved in something like that, and I felt like it was something that I didn't know how to fix back then, especially, and that's correct. I had no idea how to fix that back then. And so this GT did not become mine, unfortunately. I really liked it, but it was another pass. And speaking of GTs, I do want to mention this silver 98 GT convertible that was at a car lot where my friend worked. And this car was pretty cool, and we took it out and drove it a lot. It had the black leather interior, and it was only a 40,000 mile car. Now, this car was for sale for several years on that small dealership. The owner was really upset he had bought this car at the auction because he said it was so hard to sell, because anyone who was interested in it was too young for the insurance, couldn't handle the insurance for a V8 and a convertible. So because of that, nobody else was buying the car, and it sat for a couple of years. And we actually took it out on errands when my friend needed to go cash a check or do something for the dealership. And I remember riding in this car a lot. And every time we needed to go somewhere, we took the GT. And I know the owner was a friend of the family of my friend who was working for them, and so he trusted us in the car, but he knew that we were out having fun in it. And one time in the rain, he tried to drift it, and we went one way, and then the positive traction kicked us back the other, and we almost went through a cinder block wall. And the ironic thing about that is later I realized that where I bought my first house with my wife, that cinder block wall was down on the corner of the street we lived on, so it was very close. That part of town wasn't very familiar to me, but then I realized that's the wall that we almost went through. Another time we took this car out to go racing against my friend's 86 5-speed 5.0 Mustang Convertible, and my friend had driven this silver GT to school that day because his truck was down and the owner of the dealership let him take it. So we took it out on our lunch break to race, and we raced, and of course it beat the 5.0, and we turned around and we went back for another round. And as we were turning around, my friend was paying close attention to the tires on this car, and he noticed there was a ginormous bubble on the inside of the tire that was just ready to burst. And so luckily he saw that, and we did not race again, and we just drove the car slowly back to the school. And we had the top down, and I was just riding with my friend. It was just me and him, and we were cruising through town with the top down, and we passed in front of a police officer, and we were definitely not in school when we should have been. And he didn't do anything. I think he was busy with somebody else, but he definitely looked at us and wondered what we were doing out of school. So there are a lot of fun memories in this GT, and it was a car that just sat for a long time, and it finally sold, but it was really for sale for a few years before it sold. Now, I have to give this car credit because we did race it against my brother's V6 5-speed Mustang, and when we raced, they both stayed together for a second, but then this GT really picked up and took off. And I know a V6 is a 150 horsepower car, and this is a 225 horse, depending on what year. But we thought that since it was an automatic, it would have a harder time keeping up, but it definitely walked the V6. And another Mustang GT that was very special to us was this bright tangerine orange 96 convertible. There was also a hardtop coupe in the neighborhood, same color. Those were both very special to us at the time, and I wanted to buy the hardtop one. It was for sale, but it was just too much money. But I do have stories about both of those cars on the channel if you're interested, but those cars need to be mentioned. So in my constant search, I came across this 1997 Mustang V6 5-speed, black and gray interior, almost identical to the one that my brother and I were sharing. The only real differences were it had the same wheels, but they were not the machined wheels. They were just the painted gray. It had the Mach 460 sound system, which was an upgrade compared to my brother's. It did not have the white Mustang stripes that we liked so much, which were easily added. But it also had double the miles. It had 75,000 miles, which still isn't a whole lot, but my brother's, we bought it with 39, and it was probably in the 40 or 50,000 range at the time, and so it had more miles, but it was located in Illinois. So my parents had never bought anything on eBay before, and I begged them to please buy this car. It was half the price. They were asking $5,500, and yeah, it had double the miles, but it was still a nice looking car. And of course you don't know what you're buying until you actually test drive it and see it in person and smell the interior and everything. But I just wanted this car so bad, and I begged them and I told them it's half the price, we can't go wrong, please let me get this car. It would be so cool since we're twins to have twin cars. And my parents really considered it, and my dad, I remember he was sitting in a rocking chair by the computer, and we were pleading with him, and he said, okay, go ahead and bid on it. It had to buy it now for $5,500, but basically he said, go ahead and buy it. And my parents talked about it for a minute, and they ultimately agreed we could buy it. So we bought the car on eBay, they created an account, they bought the car, they wired the money over, and we decided we were going to fly to Illinois and drive the car back. This was going to end up being a 3-day journey and 1,500 miles. We would stop and stay in hotels and drive the car back. But the first problem was getting to Illinois. I had mentioned that my parents had a flight school. They owned 5 airplanes and this big hangar that we were just finishing, and it was a really fun time. Now, on a side note, if you really want to know how everybody has to learn and start somewhere, this story might blow your mind. My brother and I didn't know whether the Mustang was rear-wheel drive or front-wheel drive back then. And so, of course, we were ignorant, but we did not have the internet, anything like that to Google and search and find the information to this. So what we did was my brother took his Mustang in front of our hangar there, and he revved it up and just dropped the clutch, and he burned out all the way the whole length of that hangar from side to side. And my parents didn't notice because there were fuel trucks driving around there all the time that would leave tire tracks, but we were scared my parents were going to see that peg leg burnout mark all the way down the whole side of that hangar. And you know, growing up at the airport, I do say we were very good about never racing these cars down the runway or driving them on the taxiway or doing anything that would get my parents in trouble. So that was kind of a stretch, and we probably shouldn't have done that, but it did leave a burnout mark all the way the whole length of that hangar, and it was rear-wheel drive. I tell you, because I saw it. So aviation is definitely my parents' thing. They're both multi-engine trained. My dad had 6,500 flight hours, and we decided that we would fly to Illinois in the Cessna 310Q model. That's what this plane was that they owned. And it was a six-seater, twin-engine, very nice plane, and we decided we were going to take this, fly it to Illinois, and then my dad would fly it home while I drove the Mustang back with my brother and my mom. So we were flying and we got just over Colorado when my dad felt that one of the engines just wasn't performing right. He felt like it had a little vibration. He was a little worried about it. He said, you know what, let's turn around and take the plane back. And with these planes, something you need to know is their engines have to be taken off and rebuilt after a certain amount of hours. And so you have engines on these airplanes where you don't know where they've really been. So obviously my dad had rebuilt the engines himself several times. He was A&P certified, he was a mechanic in the Air Force, but I believe this was one of the engines where they purchased it rebuilt and ready to go on the plane. So my mom had looked up the numbers and the history and registration and all the different things, and she eventually found out that the engine that was having the problem happened to come off a plane that crashed, and it crashed bad. So it's actually a wonder that they even were able to salvage an engine off that plane. But these engine cores are probably not the easiest to come by, and so I'm sure people are always willing to take them and get them rebuilt. So that engine was a bad engine. So basically it made it so we had to buy airline tickets, wait a few days, and then we would be flying to Chicago O'Hare. And when we got there, we were able to rent a 2003 brand new Mustang V6. And the car was an automatic. It was a very nice car. It had like 400 miles on it. It was so new. And to tell you the truth, I really wanted to keep this one. I love the New Edge Mustangs, as you know. I absolutely love this car. And I know it was an automatic, so I really didn't have too hard of a time leaving it behind, but I really wanted this car instead just because of how nice it was. It had the '01 Cobra style hood because it was an '03, '04 V6, and you can see here's the interior, very nice, and the automatic. So you can see here my mom is behind the wheel. This was just leaving the rental car agency. I was really surprised how many Mustangs were sitting there with flat tires, and they couldn't get to them. But I just remember seeing so many brand new Mustangs and seeing so many that were sitting there parked with flat tires. That was just really weird for me. But according to the rental car agency, we weren't old enough to drive the car, my brother and me, so my mom had to drive. She did let us stop in a parking lot somewhere and get to drive it because the car only had 400 miles on it. It was so new. We wanted to know what it was like to drive a brand new Mustang. And of course we didn't really get a feel for it, but it was a nice car and I really didn't want to leave it behind. So we headed south and went to a little town called Urbana, Illinois, down towards the very bottom near Champaign. And we got down there and we saw the car parked at the dealership, and it was parked still front and center like it was for sale. The tire was pinched on the curb because they had driven it up onto the curb to advertise it. So it had this pizza shape bend in the tire. The wheel was okay, but it was parked up on the curb. They needed to add air to the tire. Some guy walked over to it, opened the door, and just started spraying orange cleaner all over the dash. And I told him to go away from it. I said, it's all right, I'll clean it, don't worry about it. And we went in and did the rest of the paperwork, and we drove off. And immediately I noticed that the clutch was shaking pretty bad. So it had some good clutch chatter when you let the clutch out in first gear. The other gears weren't so bad. And you know, there's always a little bit of that with new clutches or breaking in a clutch, it seems, but this was pretty extensive, and it was just kind of heartbreaking to think, oh no, you know, this car have problems, or is it going to get us 1,500 miles all the way home? But it seemed to run all right. I could hear the throw-up bearing was chirping, and I don't know whether it had a replacement clutch in it and they just didn't resurface the flywheel. I don't know what the deal was with it, but it was shaking. Maybe it just needed a new clutch. I did find a card inside of it that said something about a repossession agency and a business card from the previous owner who was a plumber. but it did have a perfectly clean Carfax. It was a two-owner car. Somebody bought it brand new in '96, so we found out later that it was a '97, but it was one of the first '97. So it was built in August, I think, of '96. We'll get to that in a second here, but the first owner had it for 64,000 miles, and then it had another owner in 2001 for a year and a half, and then we bought it. So it had 75,000 miles on it when we bought the car. But as I could see, it really had very few entries on the actual Carfax. It really had no bad history. It didn't have hardly any history. It was in Gibson City, Illinois when it was new, and then it went to Rantoul, Illinois, and then Bloomington, Illinois, and obviously in Champaign where we got it. But it shows that in September '03 it was first registered or manufactured. So the build date was actually in August, but it was early September when it actually was purchased in '96. So I thought that's actually pretty cool. Now you really couldn't tell it was a '96, early '97 compared to my brother's, except for the one thing, and that was the seat belt holders were full rings on his '97, and the earlier '96s had the half cup ones, and so mine had the half cup seatbelt rings on them. So that was pretty cool. So we drove the car and we went through Illinois, and part of what my mom wanted to do on the way home, which I'm really glad she did, was have a stop at some of the church sites, because we're members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and they had just built a new temple in Nauvoo, Illinois. Very beautiful place, very historic place, and so she made sure that she detoured our route through until we got to these certain places in Illinois, and we got to Nauvoo, Illinois. And so it was really nice. We got there just at dusk, and we were able to enjoy this beautiful temple. Now, something really funny about this on a side note is my friend is from Illinois, from a little tiny town of 200 people called Timewell, and he said, "How in the heck do you know where Nauvoo, Illinois is?" Because I told him about our trip, I told him about all this, and you know, obviously it's a historic church site, but he said knowing where Nauvoo, Illinois is really weird, because it's just one of the smallest little towns in the middle of nowhere. So I thought that was pretty cool that he knew where it was, and he was surprised that I knew where it was. So that's kind of a funny story. So we took this really nice scenic way home back to Utah, and we stopped in a bunch of different places like this. It's the Great River Road is what it says there, and you can see my mom's interested over there looking at the sights. Well, we're just happy to have the Mustang and enjoying getting out and actually looking at the car, because we just bought it and we still haven't had a good look at it. It did have a little dent crease on the driver door, a couple little things that we didn't know about. But we did stop at a Walmart and we got a toolkit just in case there's anything we could work on that we needed to. But we enjoyed a nice drive home over a few days, and we stopped in nice little hotels. One of the hotels was pretty crazy though, because it was right next to what we thought was a big Walmart. We saw big lights everywhere, and we went into the hotel to check in, and everywhere in the hotel it had things that hung on the door handle, it had things by the phone, and it said, "Do not answer the door for anybody." It had all these warnings everywhere. We didn't know what the deal was, and so we went out to go find that Walmart to get something to eat there, or just go drive around and find somewhere for dinner, and we noticed that that place right next door that we thought was a Walmart happened to be the state prison. I think that was in Colorado somewhere. But we went across all these different diverse areas of the United States. We saw cornfields, we saw mountains, we saw hills. It snowed on us through Denver. There was a time where we got forced over on the highway right when we were going underneath an overpass, and I had to get over, and it forced a Fox body into like a construction zone. We didn't hit anything, but he had to kind of swerve around a cone, and you know, he was pretty mad at me, and I felt bad about that. But another time we stayed in a hotel and we looked out the window, and there's a guy in a brand new Dodge truck, and he just kept staring at our hotel room. He was sitting in his truck and just staring at us the whole time. It really freaked us out, and I didn't know if he was going to try to take the car or take parts off the car or do something to us. I had no idea. but it was my mom, me, my little sister, and my twin brother. So there were four of us in the Mustang, and we enjoyed the drive. My brother and I took turns driving, and we both enjoyed it. And the car did a wonderful job purring all the way home, no issues at all. Once you got going, the clutch wasn't a problem, so everything was fine. I did feel guilty a couple of times because I had the cruise control on, and we'd be going up a hill, and the car needed to downshift, and so I put the clutch in, but with the cruise control on, it was holding the throttle pegged, and it would over rev the engine, and that really made me feel bad. It kind of scared me, and I turned off the cruise control immediately, and I did that twice on accident, and I felt really bad about that. But other than that, it was smooth sailing the whole way home. Now, if you notice in this picture, the wheels on the Mustang were the same ones like I mentioned, just painted. They weren't the machined ones, and they had the white wall tires on them. And in an effort to make the cars look identical, my brother and I found a set of the same wheels that his V6 had, which were the machined ones. And that was actually part of the story. One of the Mustangs I looked at before I bought this one was a 98 laser red black interior 5-speed car with Texas license plates that showed up in town, and I really wanted to buy it too. I remember it was parked in front of a Wendy's for sale. I think the people were staying in a hotel here in town because it was always there. And I remember on lunch break during high school, we'd drive over and look at it, and it had for sale written on the windows with window chalk. But it went to a dealership when they couldn't sell it, and the dealership put these ugly wheels on it. They were like an 8-spoke ricer wheel, and it just looked so dumb, and I wanted that car really bad, but it sold to somebody else. But I found out where they had gone to trade the wheels and the shop that had put the wheels on it, and they had these wheels, the machined stock ones, back in the back of the warehouse, and they said that they'd sell them to me for like $100. I think they would take my old ones and they would give me these for $100 difference. And so that worked out because I had tires from mine that they could put on. So it didn't really cost anything, and in the end what it did was made our two Mustangs look more identical. So here you can see my Mustang in the garage next to my brother's, and there's no side stripes, but the wheels are the same, and so at least it was starting to look a lot better. It didn't have the dual exhaust, and it didn't have the side stripes yet, but that was something we were working on doing. Now, when I compared these two cars together, it did seem pretty obvious that my paint was a little faded compared to my brother's. It still looked great, but it was just slightly faded, and that was something I was concerned about, more of if it was the same color car or not, because the dealer advertised it as fire brick red, which it wasn't. It was laser red, and the car did have the original paint, and it was in great condition, but it was a little faded compared to my brother's car. So I waxed it and cleaned it up and took care of it, and it came back very nicely, and it was so cool to see these two Mustangs together, especially since we were twins. We were used to growing up and getting duplicates of everything, toy cars, clothes, everything that twins would always have double of. So it was really cool to have this, and to see people do a double take when we drive these together down the road was awesome. So next I added the side stripes to the car. I had bought a set off eBay. They were not OEM. The font was just a little thicker, but you couldn't really tell. But they went on very nicely. I took my time, and I did an incredible job considering that I didn't do it the way that you're supposed to. Now I know when you put vinyl on, you need to use like a soapy water or Windex or some kind of a lubricant so you can apply the decal where you want it, move it around, and then squeegee the water out of it. So I just put them straight on, and I was very slow and very careful, and they turned out wonderful. So now I finally had my own Mustang. I wasn't sharing the one with my brother anymore, and even though this one wasn't technically as nice and had a little higher miles than the other one, I loved it, and I was so happy and proud to have it, and it became my car. As a matter of fact, I named the car Little Guy. So on the drive home from Illinois, it was just cruising, doing a great job, and I kept tapping the dashboard and saying, "You're doing great, little guy. You're such a good little guy." And I just kept saying that, and the name stuck. So this car was known as Little Guy. So now there was only one thing really to do to make it just like my brother's, and you can see here without the dual exhaust how terrible it looks compared to my brother's that did have the dual exhaust. It was time to do it, and I found another brand new takeoff kit. This one was for sale in California, and I bought it on eBay. It was like $100. It was a really good deal. So we had a shop welded in because it was cut to get off the car, and now we had the two cars with matching exhaust in the garage. Just really awesome, and it was a really fun time to have these Mustangs together. And so again, the shady afternoons were wonderful to wax and clean the car. We did keep them in the garage that the family had. My parents were really nice to let us keep these two Mustangs there. And of course, we spent a lot of time up at the airport. Like I had talked about, my parents ran their business up there, and we were always up there. And it was really fun because we were back behind a gated area. We each had a key card to get us into the gate and drive about half a mile or more down to where our hangar was, and it was very desolate. It was very quiet. There was nobody there. We could rev up the cars, make noise with them, do whatever we wanted, work on them, but it was just so quiet and peaceful up there. I learned to ride my bike up there. It was just a really nice place to grow up, and now it was a very nice place for the two of us to enjoy our cars. So here's my brother next to his Mustang enjoying the day, and then a picture of me a little more laid back, a little more chill, enjoying mine. It was just a nice time to have the cars, and we got the camera out and we drive around and take pictures, and there's little frontage roads here. You can see just taking pictures of anything we could. The cars looked really good with the tail lights on. I really liked that, the parking lights. And there was a higher road and a lower road, and so we would drive next to each other, and even they were parallel, so we could race a little bit, and you couldn't go too fast on this little side road, but it was fun to be able to drive together and hear the cars' exhaust echoing off each other. So being up at the airport was a very, very fun place to be. And later I would have some of my other cars up there, like my Blue Mach 1 when I'd buy it. But right now it was just a place where we had grown up our whole life, and it was always fun to be up there and have just a special quiet time up there. Now we go cruising at night and have fun, and the pictures didn't really come out too well, but it was just a lot of fun having these cars. So just like we went to Donner Lake before, we decided to take the Mustangs on a trip, but this time my family decided instead of taking a Suburban and a Mustang, why not take both Mustangs on a trip all the way to Reno, Lake Tahoe area. So this was a really fun family vacation. We had my brother and his Mustang and me and mine, and the rest of the family in both. And what a family photo. Isn't that so cool? And my parents were the ones who made this all happen. So they have all the credit for being cool because they let us do what we wanted to do with this. So here's a picture of me by mine on the highway out in the middle of nowhere, my brother next to his. And it was just a really fun trip. It's a 10-hour drive from Utah to Reno. It was just a lot of fun to have the two cars together, and they both performed wonderfully. And so just a lot of fun to have the two cars together. So the 10-hour drive didn't seem very long, and it was fun to travel together and get to see each other's cars. And again, we had the camera and we try to take pictures. They never come out like you hope they would, but it was just a really cool drive across the desert with two matching Mustangs and a fun time. And so we made it across the ET highway and through different parts of Reno until we finally made it to where my grandma lived on her little ranch. And so here are cool pictures of the two Mustangs in front of her barn, if you'll call it that. It's more like a nice garage. And it was just fun to park there and have the cars together and go on a family vacation out there. And it's a place that we really enjoyed to go. This is one of my favorite pictures of the two Mustangs. It was a nice crisp summer morning. Not too hot, not too cold, just a wonderful time. And this next picture you can see my brother and I are out there working on the Mustangs, cleaning them up more than anything. You can see our little brother there. He would go on to own several SS Camaros, WS6 Trans Ams, Corvettes. He's had a ton of GM cars, and we're happy with that because we like American muscle. So I could always tell my Mustang apart because the tires had a bigger sidewall. My brothers were a little bit skinnier sidewall, and I think mine were just more for when the person bought them in Illinois. They had better all-season tire that way because of the weather and stuff. But other than that, they looked very identical. And sometimes we would have to look at the license plate as we get close to figure out whose was who, or look for the mock audio kidneys that are in the back window there and the tweeters. And so sometimes it was difficult to tell the cars apart, but it was really awesome to have these matching Mustangs. The garage looked really cool to have the two. You can see in these pictures I didn't have the clear corners yet, but I would be getting those pretty soon. And so here's my brothers with the clear corners, and just these pictures of how happy we were to have these matching Mustangs. And there's another picture of my brother and a picture of me next to our cars, just enjoying a nice evening and having fun. And we took these cars to high school, and usually we would alternate. We'd take his one day, take mine the next day, take turns driving. But sometimes it was fun to take both of them. And it was funny because the days we'd bring both of them, people would say, "Why do you bring both of them if you're going the same place?" And the time that we would share and take one of them, they'd say, "How come you didn't bring the other one?" But the best story from high school was we would watch everybody leave for lunch, and when everyone would try to get out for lunch, it was a big traffic jam and people were bumper to bumper, and we didn't want to have anything to do with that because we didn't want anyone to hit our car. And I have a list that I just found in all these documents of my car, and it was the list of everybody in high school who got in a car accident. My brother and I had written it down. And there are 32 names on that list of people we watched have accident. Actually, even more, because I remember my brother and I watched a Volkswagen Rabbit convertible get rear-ended and watched everybody's heads do whiplash. It was kind of funny because nobody got hurt. They just looked like rag dolls. I shouldn't be laughing at that. But anyway, we would watch everybody leave the parking lot because we didn't want our cars to get damaged and get involved in anything like that. And usually after a few minutes the parking lot was empty and everyone was gone, and then we'd get in our car and go. So the school police officer noticed that, and she complimented us on how great we were at not getting involved in the chaos and being clear-minded and good with our cars and all that. But then just a little bit later, we had the Mustangs there at the school, and my brother tried to get out early for lunch. He had a real reason to hurry, and he was waiting in line, and he kind of drifted the car out of the parking lot and drove down the emergency lane and got to where he needed to go. And after lunch, we were both walking down the hall, and the school police officer grabbed both of us by our arms and said, "I don't know which one of you that was." And my brother instantly started to say, "It was me, I'm sorry, I'm trying to be honest," because we really did respect the law and had a lot of fear of getting in trouble or getting a ticket or whatever. But the school officer said, "Don't tell me who it was, I don't really want to know, just don't do it again or I'm going to give you a ticket." So we were both like, okay, and we were fine with that. Although we did feel bad that we had betrayed the trust of the school police officer. But speaking of school, we took these Mustangs to prom. So here are the cool pictures of us on our prom day, and each of us in front of the cars. This one's me, and we had our dates. I'm the one on the left and my brother on the right. Unfortunately, the girl I went with was in a head-on collision when she was getting her hair done and everything for the dance that night. So earlier in the day, she totaled her car, and you can tell it was sad. In these pictures, her face is a little swollen, her lips a little swollen. She still went to the dance. She was crying and didn't really want to go, but I told her it was okay and that I still wanted her to go. And so she did, and of course when we went to the dance, all of her friends crowded around her, and she spent a lot of time talking to everybody, and everybody was more interested in talking to her and seeing if she was okay. So the dance really didn't have a lot of dancing, and that's okay. I'm just glad she was okay, but the airbag hit her in the face, and that was really too bad. But we had a great time, and it was really fun to have the Mustangs and take them to senior ball like that. But here is a really cool picture. If you look closely, you'll notice there are 3 laser red Mustangs in these pictures, and one of them belonged to a girl in our neighborhood who the parents were really cool. They were the dad was one of our church leaders, and his daughter ended up buying this Mustang, and of course we already knew which one it was because it was for sale here in town. It had a gold pony on the front where they had changed the chrome to gold. It was an automatic 98, so no clock on the dash and stuff, but the same wheels, same color. It's just really cool to see them all together like that. And us being who we were, we enjoyed the car so much, and we offered to wash it and detail it for her because it was always dirty. And so we went over and got the car and did that, and the dad said, hey, why don't you go out and race them and see which one's faster. And we knew the automatic wouldn't be as fast as our 5-speed cars, and it wasn't. But it was pretty quick and pretty peppy for what it was. So my brother and I continued with our aviation as well. This is the day that my brother soloed. There's a picture of him and a picture of him with my dad and my little sister, who ends up having the Red Fire GT that's been on the channel. And here's a picture of me. I also soloed that day. It was a very special day for us. But the real truth was, flying was fun, but I always would rather be with the Mustangs. Every time I take off and I fly, I'd look for the Mustang down below. And I just loved my car more than I enjoyed flying. And I think everybody has the right to pursue their true dreams. So even though we're in a family of aviation, it just wasn't what I really wanted to do. But I do remember flying and looking down and knowing what part of town I was and which Mustangs were for sale on which car lots and seeing them down there. And I just would rather be with the cars. But anyway, on this very special day, my brother and I had both soloed, and that means flying by yourself for those who don't know about aviation. And my dad was very proud, my mom was very proud. This picture of my mom and me. And they said, well, what do you guys want to do today? And my brother and I said, well, we'd like to go meet up with our friends who are camping. They were up at a scout camp. So they let us go, and we took the Suburban, and this happened to us on the way. I was driving, and we were stopped on the freeway in construction, and an F-350 flatbed truck smashed into the back of us. You can't really tell in this picture, but it buckled the ceiling of the Suburban. It totally destroyed it and totaled it. Pushed us into the Honda Civic in front and totaled that car. And here's the newspaper article about it, because it actually made the news. And you can see the guy's truck totally destroyed. The truck caught on fire. A nice truck driver jumped out with a fire extinguisher and put the fire out, but it was havoc. And we got out of the Suburban kind of disoriented, and there were cars going on the southbound lanes, you know, and so we had to make sure not to cross the median, get run over by all those fast-moving cars. It was really a terrible situation, and after that I just really didn't feel like flying anymore, doing anything like that. I just wanted to enjoy being comfortable and not having to worry about stressful things like that. So at that point I basically ended the flying. But as high school was ending, I had an art class, and I did this Mustang drawing of Las Vegas and driving the Mustang down there. I thought this was really fun. I think I did this one with a light table, so I got the body of the car and then filled everything in myself and drew everything else, but I thought that was pretty cool. I did find a couple things in the Mustang. This was a Taco Bell receipt from 2002 under the back seat. I documented everything. This was the nail that was in my tire one time. I just took such good care of this car. I kept everything for it. This is the build sheet I found under the back seat. I thought that's really cool. I've never had a build sheet to any of my cars. I hear they're behind the bumpers on the Cobras and the Mach 1s sometimes, between the bumper cover and the styrofoam back there. But you can tell that we just live and breathe Mustangs. We go on family vacations to Lake Powell, and we would make sand Mustangs instead of sand castles, and it was just really fun. And it was something that we were very proud of, and something that we had to identify ourselves with. So we graduated high school, and then my brother and I both served missions for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and we both went to South America to preach the gospel. And so here I am in Paraguay, riding on a bus that was so crazy. The bus drivers would be driving stick shift while taking money with the hand they were driving stick with, and making change, handing out tickets, while driving in a country that had virtually no traffic laws. There was like one stoplight that I actually saw. The rest were all just intersections where people just darted out and tried to make their own way. And you know, it was just crazy. And these buses were straight piped and super loud, and they were flooring it everywhere they could go to try to get in front of each other. And it was just like buses racing NASCAR all day long. It was nuts. But I'll tell you what, it does something to you to ride on a bus and see other cars driving around and not have that same freedom. And it made me appreciate so much more my car and knowing that I'd get to go back to my car. So here's just a little bit of me in Paraguay going down the dirt roads and in some of the nicer church buildings. And guess what I found in Paraguay? A blue Mustang 94, 95 V6. It has the side marker light on it there, Paraguayan license plate, and I'll tell you what, I actually like the Subarus. No matter how much crap the local Subaru guys talk on the Mustangs, I do enjoy the sound of a nice turbo Subaru, and I saw a lot of them down there. This is what the money actually looked like. You could see how dirty, ripped up, taped together it usually was. It was very rare to see a new bill like this. I actually got this as change right before I left after 2 years, and I had no idea that that's what the money was supposed to look like. But the bus drivers would be exchanging this dirty money like that quickly while driving. It was totally insane. Now, while I was on the bus, I spotted something else down there. This was 2005, and guess what was brand new in '05? The S197 Mustang, and there was a GT there parked next to a 350Z on one of the car lots, and so that was really cool to see. So this was a very interesting time in my life because I was on my own for once. I didn't have my twin brother around. I had companions, but next thing you know, the guy who's driving a Mustang is the one who's riding around being driven by a 12-year-old in a horse and buggy. But I did get to see how most of the world lives and be very grateful for what I have. I thought it was cool that a real Swiss Army knife was used as a faucet. But anyway, it was a great time in my life, and it was a very difficult time in my life. Probably the most difficult thing I've ever been through. But the nice thing was my parents said that while we're gone, they would take care of our Mustangs. And so they would send us pictures like this where they would get them out and wash them, and they kept them in the garage for us. And it was very nice of them to do that for us. They went on dates and sent us pictures of them driving around in beautiful America. They would see cars like this electric green V6 at the Costco parking lot, and they would drive the Mustangs around to keep them clean and good and running, and they would send us pictures whenever they saw a Mustang. And so my brother and I would send each other pictures. On our free time, we would draw. You can see the road to Reno, the ET highway. You can see Reno. This is pictures of things that you could tell were important to us. And now, since you've seen the story, you know why that these places are so important to us. Cruising down the highways together, going to Las Vegas because it was nearby. And yeah, we did have pictures of Mach 1s and stuff we'd send because that was the next dream of ours, as well as taking these Mustangs and doing something to them. We did want to put 5 4-liter supercharged engines in them, and that was a plan in the future, but we sent each other these artwork things because we could draw a little bit and try to keep focused but also relax a little bit and send each other artwork back and forth of the Mustangs that we missed. And while we were gone, my parents would take it up to the airport, and my little sister would send us things with my grandpa putting a funny cartoon thing on the door to tease us. But they would also use our Mustangs to help with the missionary work in Utah, and they would take the missionaries for rides when they needed to go places in the Mustangs. And they felt really good about that because they thought, well, we were out serving and doing our best. They could be using our Mustangs at home to do good things too. And so we were very happy about this. And this was even a time they took the Mustangs out to Zion National Park with the missionaries. And of course it made me jealous. I wish I was driving my Mustang, but I was in Paraguay. But it was okay. And I was grateful that they did that and happy to do that. So my brother was in Uruguay, I was in Paraguay, and we were able to meet in Argentina and fly back to Texas, and from Texas to Utah. And what we didn't know was my mom had looked up the flights, being such an aviation guru as she is, and she found out that there was a seat between my brother and me on the flight from Dallas-Fort Worth to Las Vegas. So she flew to Dallas and surprised us at the airport, and she sat between us on the plane on the way home. So it was a surprise meeting. I hadn't seen my brother in 2 years, and we both hadn't seen our mom in 2 years. And so now we were able to be all together on this plane flight to Las Vegas, where the rest of the family was waiting for us. And so we got back to Las Vegas, and we got with the family, and this is us traveling home. The first place we wanted to go was Taco Bell, believe it or not, because in South America there really isn't a lot of Mexican food, in Paraguay at least, or Uruguay, and so we wanted to go to Taco Bell. We missed that so much. But anyway, our parents had kept these cars for us, and we wanted to make an impression on them and let them know that the cars weren't more important than the family or the missions or anything. And that's why we did leave and go on these missions and left the cars behind. But we couldn't help it. We got home, and our dad opened up the garage and was like, "Look, here's your cars." We were trying to go into the house and not run right to our cars, which you know are very important to us. But my dad went and opened up the garage and said, "Look, they're both here just like you left them." And so that was really nice of him to do that. And so now we wanted to start modding these cars just a little bit and continue with them. And you can't really tell in this picture, but the tires look wider. And the reason they do is because, well, our parents let us choose something to mod the cars with right when we got home. And the first thing we decided to do was get a nice set of wheels and tires. And we looked at GT wheels, we looked at chrome wheels, we looked at chrome dipped 99 GT wheels. But ultimately we decided that with laser red and this body style, 2000 Cobra R wheels would look the best. And they really did look great on these cars. Now if you look at the ones on my brother's car, they were the real correct shape that the 2000 Cobra R wheel should be. A really deep inner area there where the lug nuts are, and flatter spokes. And his wheels came first. We ordered them from the same place in Michigan, had them sent cross country, and his came first, and mine came a lot later, like a month or two later. And this is in a time where back order wasn't even a thing like it is today. And when mine finally came, they were not the same. They were advertised and purchased by the same company the same day we bought them, but his must have been the last set, and mine came and they looked more like the Focus SVT wheels. So you could see the center part's not as dished and the spokes curve in a lot more, and I just was pretty upset about it, but I still liked them and they really did look good on the car. But they definitely weren't the same, and so you would see the two cars, and it's one of those things where you know that one set's better than the other, so mine were always going to be inferior. So every time I looked at them I was just like, yeah, they're not correct, they do look a little bit off, but the car really did look good. This is one of my favorite pictures of the car, and I would drive it to work. I ended up taking full-time school, but then I did part-time school and full-time work to get through. And my brother and I were both working at the same place and going to college at the same time. And then one day at college we had a lunch break between classes, so we got in his Mustang, we went out to get lunch, and we were driving past a high school when all of a sudden, BAM! We both saw it coming. There was a girl who was going to turn. She had her license for 10 days and she turned through an intersection and hit us right in the door. Titaniced the whole side of the car all the way down, hit the quarter panel, bent the rear axle, spun us around into a curb. And we saw it coming. We couldn't avoid it. There was nothing we could do. She just turned right into us. So when the police got there, she lied and told them that we had our turn signal on, and that's why she turned and crashed into us, which was a total lie. She had all her friends there trying to lie for her that said they saw it happen. But the police didn't believe their story. They looked at the situation, they saw where we were going, and they said, no, you turned into this guy and smashed up his Mustang. And we were ready to get in a fist fight. We were so upset. I mean, can you tell how much we love this car? And so, anyway, they were going to total the car. And so my brother and I parked it in the driveway next to mine so the insurance adjuster could come see the car. And he got there and he saw the two cars together and he could tell how special these cars were to us. And he said, I'm going to cut you a check for the car. Keep the car. If you want to fix it, do whatever you want. Because we told him we want to fix this car. So my brother got to work, started pulling the door off, started tearing things apart. He got to the point where he did everything he could do. And then he ordered a door off eBay from another laser red Mustang, and he went to work pulling the axle off. And you know, my brother's known for YouTube videos and how-tos, and this is where he started getting his hands dirty and started working on cars, because we both had to start somewhere. But when we got the axle off, you can see how it's bent there. It's just a bent axle from getting hit from that car. And so he dropped the axle, and he did buy a really nice Ford racing axle for a Cobra or a GT that came with 373 gears. It was a 8.8 rear end, just like you'd have on a GT or a Cobra, with the gears already installed from Ford Racing. And then once he got the car where it would drive again and be straight, he had a body shop go through and do all the metal work. They cut the whole quarter panel off, they welded a new one in, they straightened everything out, and then the car was back to normal, and it looked just as good as before. You really couldn't even tell. And so the next thing I wanted to do was start cleaning up the car and modding it. So I bought some Cobra style headlights for it. I already had the clear corners, and that made the car look a lot better. And something else that I've been wanting to do the whole time I had the car but never really had the money to do was buy a complete fog light kit set for the car. And this came with the brackets, the new fog lights, the wiring, and even a factory OEM switch to go on the center console. And so I was up at the airport doing that. My little sister was there helping me. And I just remember this was all while I was going through college, and so I would buy things like this to kind of help cope with all the stress and everything. And I just wanted the car to look good, and it did. I thought it was very presentable. It was a very nice car to be driving around. I was very happy to have it. I thought it looked great now, especially with the headlights and fog lights. Again, here's a little before and after on each side of what the headlight difference was. It was just so much better that way. And then of course we'd have our birthdays, and our parents would put Mustangs with white stripes on the cake and everything. But we were living in an apartment complex, and I was going to school, and I was going to work, and I worked nights, and I was supposed to get up at 3 in the morning, and I got a call at 2 in the morning, and it woke me up. It was very rude, and they said, "Is this Justin?" And I said, "Yes." And again, this was early in the morning, and I was trying to figure out who was calling me and what was going on, and they said, "Get outside immediately. Your car's been hit in the parking lot." And I said, "Sorry, who is this?" They said, "This is Officer so-and-so with the police department. You need to come outside, your car's been hit." You know, so I'm like, oh, great. So I got dressed, and I went outside, and there was a police car there, and I was talking to the officer, and he said, "Your car's been hit in the parking lot." And I said, "Oh, really?" And I was trying to get details, and he was handing me a clipboard and telling me to sign stuff. And I was like, "Well, who hit my car?" And he's like, "I did." And then he like didn't give me any details. He just said, "The city's going to pay to have it fixed. Sign this. I need to go." He was just really rude about it for hitting my car and causing this kind of trouble, and then not really taking the responsibility. I mean, he did. Obviously, he can't hit and run, but it did spiderweb the paint, and it did put a pretty good scuff on there, and the city did pay for it. Now, what bothered me was the city wouldn't give me a Mustang rental car. They gave me like a really cheap car, and they said it's supposed to be compared to what you drive. And I say, a Mustang is a Mustang. How come I can't have a Mustang rental? But anyway, so here's the Mustang at the collision center getting the new bumper. Well, it was the same bumper. They just had to repaint it and stuff. And that was okay. You know, it did have a little damage on it from before, so it really didn't bother me too bad, but I knew it wasn't going to match perfectly. At least the other bumper did. So the next thing I did to the car was an intake manifold gasket replacement. We noticed it was leaking coolant, and I had found out that it was kind of normal for these cars, and so we took the intake manifold off, and we got it all cleaned up, and we had some friends come over and help, and there's my little brother over there helping clean out the parts. We would hand them to him, and he'd clean them out, and my other friend was pretty mechanical, and he was involved. You can see him there, the big guy, and here he is. He had to Dremel something off that we couldn't get that was stuck, and that was really nice of him to help me. And this is before I had ever really worked on cars. I never pulled an engine, I never did cams, I never did anything like this yet, so it was quite a process. And so, I mean, we did this in an apartment complex where we probably shouldn't have, but I continued doing maintenance up at the airport. I would change the oil and do all those things. And speaking of the airport, we had a really awesome time up there, and we had the opportunity to have my parents buy a Mustang for my little sister, and we picked out a black 98 V6. It was an automatic, but it showed up at a car lot here in town, and it had bullet wheels on it. It looked so good, we couldn't help but tell our parents that it was the one they had to buy, and they got it for a pretty good deal. I think they paid like $3,000 for it or something. It had higher miles on it. But it was really cool to get this for my two sisters. You could see them in there really excited to have the car. It was automatic, so we knew they could drive it really easy, and we just wanted to keep Mustangs in the family and keep things going. So as you can see, it got the treatment, it got the white stripes down the doors. It actually got the old V6 wheels from our Mustang because we wanted the bullet wheels that were on it, and my sister didn't care about them, so we got those, and that was really fun. And my sisters shared that Mustang for a little while, and they really enjoyed driving it and having a nice Mustang, and it was fun to have another Mustang in the family. So my brother decided to get a white 2001 Mustang GT. He kept his V6 and he got this one as well. And so he would drive this, and his wife had the V6, and she had a little Honda hatchback when they got married, and so he said, let's get a GT, and you can drive the V6 and I'll drive the GT around, and they could swap around too. And so they really enjoyed that. And at that time I decided that it would be best for me and my wife to get a Lexus for my wife to drive around. So I want this to be known, because I tell people this, before I had any of my other Mustangs, especially any V8 Mustangs, before I bought my Mach 1, before I bought the Bullet, before I bought any of the Terminator Cobras, I bought my wife a Lexus first, because I was trying to do the right thing and be the good husband. And so I got her this really nice Lexus, and we enjoyed it as a family car, and that was all great, and we were happy. And then I decided I really wanted to get my Mach 1, and that's going to be another story. But I did get the Mach 1, and I had the Mach 1 and the V6, and I was able to leave the Mach 1 up at the airport and daily drive the V6, and it worked out great. So then my brother decided he wanted to buy his Terminator, and there was a lot going on, so he decided it was time to sell the V6. And that was really hard for me because these cars were a pair. They were a package deal. It's like I didn't really want to have mine anymore if he wasn't going to have his, and it felt kind of bad. So he sold his V6 Mustang. It's hard to see all the writing and stuff on the windows, but he sold it for $3,300, which was a really good deal for a car that had been taken such good care of, even though it was wrecked and everything. But he sold it for $3,000 or something like that. And you can see he took off his 2000 Cobra R wheels, and he had them on his Mach 1 for a little while. So he had the Mach 1 as well. And that made me feel like, well, I guess I don't know if I really need mine anymore like that, but I still wanted to keep it in the family. But I also really, really wanted to have a Bullet Mustang, and I knew that I could have a Bullet Mustang and daily drive it. It wouldn't have to be a perfect car, and that's how the whole story of my Bullet started. So I decided I'd rather have the car, even if it was just for a little while, and I could daily drive it, and at least have a V8, and at least have a car I can go learn to do donuts with, and burnouts, and racing, and do all the fun stuff that I've done with the car. And that has been an incredible story, and if you haven't seen the whole series on that, it's a really good story. But anyway, I decided that I could get a Bullet, and then what I would do is I would sell my little sister my V6 Mustang. And even to make things even better, they had the black V6 together, but they also had a red convertible 96 V6 Mustang that I had found for my sister for $1,000, and it needed some work. I put a new top on it, and I said, look, here's the deal. You take my Mustang, you take little guy, and it's such a nice car, I can't just sell it to anybody. You take little guy, and we'll sell your V6, and whatever we get out of the V6 we'll put towards me buying my Bullet. You know, I had already bought the Bullet, but it would help make up for me buying the Bullet. So I took the Cobra wheels off and I put these chrome bullet wheels on that I had bought down in Las Vegas, and I took good care of the car. Even though it wasn't really mine anymore, she would come over, I'd do the brakes on it, I would always be working on it, and she noticed that, and she was very nice about that, and she was always laughing about how it's still my car because I was always working on it and everything. And I would see it around town where she worked at a doctor's office, parked out there, and her friends, co-workers would tell her how nice of a Mustang it was, and they didn't know the difference between a Cobra or a V6 or anything. They just saw a nice looking Mustang with chrome wheels, and they complimented her all the time on it. And eventually she moved away, she got married and moved away, and her husband decided that he didn't want the Mustang around anymore, and they wanted to get a Veloster instead. And he said something like, "Hey, let's get rid of the Mustang. We'll sell it." And so she told me that they were going to sell it, and they offered it back to me, but I just wasn't in a position at that time with everything I was doing with the Bullet, the Blue Mach 1. I'm sure I had a couple GTs on the side there as well. And I just said, you know, go ahead and sell it to somebody. There was somebody up where she was living who wanted to buy it, whose grandpa worked for Ford, and who said that they really wanted to buy the car and take care of it. And so I said, yeah, go ahead, let it go to them, because they said they really wanted the car. So she sold the car to them, and a week or two later, I think the kid called her and said the clutch had gone out, which, by the way, both mine and my brother had our clutches done by a dealership not too long after we had bought the cars, and so there was still plenty of life on those clutches. So the kid probably didn't know how to drive and burned them out. But over the years, I kept an eye out, and I saw the chrome bullet wheels for sale, and they were off the car, and you could see the side stripes in the picture. So I texted the number and I talked to the guy, and it turned out it was the guy who bought the car, and he said the transmission was grinding and he was going to sell the wheels so that he could buy a new transmission and then just get cheap wheels later. So I don't know whatever happened to it at that point. I don't know where the car is. I assume it's still up in northern Utah somewhere, and it'd be really nice to find out the details of the car. Now, something really cool that happened was I was able to take my Mach 1 back to the high school and clean it, put it on the lift, enjoy having it at the auto shop. And this was a place where we took the V6 Mustangs. My brother and I would always work on them during our auto shop class, and it was really nice to go back there and actually have the car that I really wish I could have had. Like I said, I'm very grateful for my V6, and you can tell how much it meant to me, and I loved it very much. But the real truth is I love the New Edge Mustangs so much more. It's just what I really want, and that's why I have what I have. And it was really nice to go back to the high school and be there with the car that I wish I could have had back then, and that's the real truth about it. But I love my V6 Mustang, and it's sad to see it go, but that was the story behind it. But that's the story of my 97 Mustang V6, whether you want it to be the story of my first car, which is what my brother ended up with, or this one, which technically is what I consider my first Mustang because it was all mine. So thanks for watching. I know this has been a really long story, but I hope you enjoyed it. And there's definitely more to the story than this, but I really enjoyed making this, and I hope you enjoyed it too. So thanks for watching, and stay tuned for more Mustang content.